Exploits, God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Déclaration de députés, statements by members. The honourable member, order please. Order please. The honourable member from Vancouver Granville.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to John Horgan, British Columbia's former Premier and Canada's ambassador to Germany, who passed away far too soon on November 12th. John from Langford, as he was affectionately known, was a great Canadian, a fierce fighter for our province. He believed and lived the belief that you can build a strong economy and do the best for the most vulnerable, and that the two are inextricably linked. And that's what we loved about John. Even as a federal Liberal, I admired his pragmatism and his passion, his ability to cross traditional boundaries of politics to build a coalition of British Columbians that dared to build a better future. And our province is better off having had John Horgan as our Premier. To his wife, Ellie, and his children, I send, on behalf of all of us in this House, our sincere condolences. Thank you for sharing John with us. Rest in peace, John. May your memory live long and prosper.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, I am deeply worried about our forestry workers. They are very dedicated to their profession. Many have already lost their jobs. Now, 1,400 more jobs are directly threatened in the Lac-Saint-Jean and Côte-Nord regions because of a federal decree. A decree that the Environment Minister wishes to impose. And what's the MP for Jonquière doing? Nothing. Hasn't done a thing. Hasn't asked a single question in the House to defend workers. He hasn't made a single move to defend our workers. He just participates in consultations and discussions that don't lead to anything. Worse still, the MP for Jonquière voted twice to keep this Liberal government in power, letting them impose this destructive decree. It's very clear that the Liberals and the Bloc Québécois have formed a coalition against our regions and against our forestry sector. We need to say no to this hypocrisy. We need to bring back common sense. Let's bring it home. It's time for an election.
L'honorable député de Sherbrooke.
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order, please.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On July 24th, a great Sherbrooke woman passed away at the age of 94. Liliane Poulin was very involved in politics in Sherbrooke. She was a seasoned volunteer who was driven by her convictions and her deep belief in democracy. She cared deeply about the well-being of her community, and she worked tirelessly to convince people to get involved in politics in order to change things. She was very interested in the world of politics. As such, she had many positions during many election campaigns. Unfortunately, health problems forced her to put a stop to her political activities at the age of 90 years old, but she remained passionate about politics until the very end. I wish to transmit my deepest, most sincere condolences to the loved ones of Miss Poulin, and I thank them for having shared this incredible woman with the Sherbrooke community.
L'honorable député de...
The honourable member for Trois-Rivières. The Centre communautaire de loisirs Jean Noël Trudel in Bas-du-Camp is celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. This centre, which welcomes over 2,500 people a week, offers a wide range of community services, including a sponsorship program for disadvantaged young people, day camps, sports, cultural activities, and more. The centre is a huge success thanks to the passion and dedication of its staff. Among their staff is the heart and soul of the centre, its general manager, Gaëtan Laperrière. Laperrière was hired in 1989. He has worked as a group leader, hall usher, volleyball manager, and then he went on to become head of programming and general manager in 2008. Centre Jean-Noël Trudel's ability to offer so many quality services to people in the area is largely thanks to the dedication of Gaëtan and his team. Bravo Gaëtan, bravo team, happy 40th anniversary, and long live the Centre Jean-Noël Trudel.
The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Speaker, on behalf of Canada's Sri Lankan diaspora, including both Sinhalese Canadians and Tamil Canadians, I extend heartfelt congratulations to Sri Lanka's President Anura Kumara Dissanayaka and his Progressive Party National People's Power on their historic majority in the parliamentary elections. This victory represents a mandate to implement the promised economic and constitutional reforms, including addressing long-standing demands such as returning state-acquired lands in the north to their rightful owners. The Sinhalese in the south, the Tamils in the Jaffna north, and all ethnic minorities, including Muslims and Malaya Tamils, have expressed newfound trust in the government. I urge Canada to seize this opportunity to reset its approach, shifting away from influence of diaspora groups with divisive agenda and focusing instead on fostering respectful and strengthened bilateral relations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Hastings, Lennox-Naddington.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, Canadian children have never been worse off. Yesterday, Campaign 2000 published their national report card, and under this Prime Minister, child poverty jumped 2.5% between 2021 and 2022, the largest annual increase on record for the second straight year in a row. With the cost of food up 35% since this government took office, it's no wonder that nearly 1 in 5 children, totaling 1.4 million, are living in poverty. And Mr. Speaker, breaking news, Canada has failed to improve its ranking on the Climate Change Performance Index. Sadly, Canada still ranks 62 out of 67 as other countries boast a better environmental record without punishing their people with the carbon tax. A Conservative government will bring fiscal responsibility and accountability back to Ottawa, scrap the tax, and put affordable food on the tables of middle-class Canadians. Let's bring it home.
The Honourable Member from Etobicoke North.
Mr. Speaker, an epic story to inspire us all. It's about compassion, passion, and integrity, immortalized in the movie Chariots of Fire with an important Canadian connection. 100 years ago at the 1924 Paris Olympics, Scottish sprinter Eric Liddell, son of missionaries, refused to run on a Sunday to compete in his signature race, the 100-meter sprint. Instead, he ran the 200 and 400-meter events, winning bronze and gold, the gold in world record time. Liddell exemplified the very best of athletics, and his faith and sport gave him a platform to help others. A year after winning Olympic glory, he returned to China as missionary, teacher, and mentor. When war approached, he sent his wife Florence and daughters back to Canada. He never saw them again. Liddell died in a Japanese internment camp, aged 43. We join his family in Canada to celebrate his life, and his legacy endures.
L'honorable député de Sudbury.
Mr. Speaker, if you want to know what the future of Canada's clean energy economy looks like, then look no further than my riding of Sudbury. Sudbury is a success story in combining environmental stewardship with economic development. Canada's mining industry creates close to 700,000 direct and indirect jobs. And, Mr. Speaker, we're just getting started. Mining contributes $161 billion to Canada's economy. That's close to 8% to the country's GDP. At this time of global uncertainty, developing a reliable supply chain for critical minerals is vital to Canada's economic growth, peace, and security. Critical minerals and mining are at the center of the clean energy transition. And with over 300 mining supply, technology, and innovation businesses, I am proud to say Sudbury is at the heart of this effort.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Kootenay, Columbia.
Mr. Speaker, today is National Child Day and also Day on the Hill for Ronald McDonald House Charities Canada. Ronald McDonald House helps families struggling with life's toughest and most unexpected moments caring for a sick child. Last year, their 16 houses, 19 family homes provided comfort and care to over 18,000 families across Canada when their child received treatment. Ronald McDonald House is joined today by Lindsay Williamson, a dedicated mother and advocate for her son Mason, who was born with a rare genetic disease. It has been a lifeline for their family that has provided a place of comfort, rest, normalcy amidst the chaos of multiple hospital visits. As Lindsay has said, strong families are essential in building blocks for strong communities. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't agree more. Let's welcome Ronald McDonald Houses from across Canada and help them to deliver the care and comfort that families can also heal.
Oh. Here, here. The honourable member from Willowdale.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that foreign interference poses a grave threat to our democracy. That's why many are concerned about the Leader of the Opposition's refusal to obtain his security clearance. While the RCMP has uncovered foreign criminal activity in Canada, the Conservative leader prefers to close his eyes and repeat empty slogans in this House. We should all be concerned about such blatant disregard for the safety of Canadians. Every other party leader in this House has acted with vigilance by obtaining their security clearance to stay fully informed. So I'd like to suggest that rather than obsess about maintaining tight control over his caucus, as reported in today's Globe and Mail, the Leader of the Opposition expend his energy on immediately applying for his security clearance. National security has to remain every member's priority. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, this government is putting Paul Bernardo ahead of victims. First, the transfer to medium security in the dead of night to a jail with cushy conditions, including a hockey rink that doubles as a tennis court. No advance notice was given to victims. The latest issue is that the victims, including the French and Mahaffey families, are now being told that they can't attend Bernardo's hearing next week in person. This is the right that every victim should have to present their victim impact statement in person. The parole board's reason? Security. They won't say what security is at issue, though. The Correctional Service of Canada has an army of officers available to assist, but they choose to hide, to obfuscate. Why? I believe it's because they want to hide the true lax conditions of Bernardo's incarceration. They bend over backwards for Paul Bernardo while ignoring the basic rights of the victims' families. The French and Mahaffey families and all victims have been through enough. Why is this government re-victimizing them?
The honourable member from Battle River, Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, reading Canadian political news right now makes binge-worthy political dramas on Netflix look tame. Here's the plot. There are allegations of fraud, arson, destruction of records, grounded private jets, missing witnesses, and unfulfilled contracts. Scandals with the now just former Minister of Employment are stacking up. He claimed to be Indigenous, even though he was not. But he certainly wanted to be, because he netted millions in contracts that were supposed to go to Indigenous-owned businesses. It's been revealed there were connections between that former minister and an international drug smuggling ring, and claims that the so-called Randy that he kept denying that he wasn't netted millions in government contracts. That minister may be out, but Mr. Speaker, here's the brass tacks of the situation. It's time for Canadians to put that morally questionable and corrupt government on notice. It's time for a carbon tax election so that Canadians can elect a common-sense Conservative government to restore order, accountability, and bring home a country that actually does the work Canadians expect.
Order. The honourable member from Surrey, Newton.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians elect MPs to represent their communities in Ottawa, not to serve their party leaders' interests. But the Conservative leader does not seem to care. After more than 18 Conservative MPs advocated for Housing Accelerator Fund to support their communities, the opposition leader imposed gag orders, silencing his MPs from pushing for federal funding because he wants to slash housing initiatives across this country. Surrey residents cannot afford the Conservative leaders' reckless plan to cut our $95 million agreement that would unlock 16,500 new homes over the next decade. It is time for Conservative MPs to stand up to their leader and fight his cuts to their community so we can solve the housing crisis.
Order. The honourable member from North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, the BC NDP's cabinet has been announced, and the vast majority of their leadership are women. In fact, the BC MLAs overall are more than half women, a first. Research shows when groups come together with a broad amount of diversity, decisions are more effective, a better fit for everyone. As my friend Karen reminds me, when something is more accessible, it is more accessible for everyone. Research tells us that women are asked less than half as often as men to run for politics and need to be asked multiple times to consider it. I hope all of us in this House remember to get out there and ask many times for the amazing women of our communities to run for all political roles. With more inclusive leadership, we can create better solutions, better communities, and a better Canada.
L'honorable député d'Abitibi-Bay.
The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Bay James Nunavik EU. Mr. Speaker, today is National Children's Day. This is an opportunity, a very important one, to remember that children are the future of our society and they deserve our utmost care and protection. Unfortunately, too many children still live in precarious conditions, with unequal access to education, quality health care, a balanced diet, and a healthy environment. Poverty, abuse, and lack of resources are realities that many of our children face on a daily basis. It is our responsibility to offer them a better future. The Bloc Québécois would like to take this opportunity to remind the federal government of its promise to invest $1 billion in meals at schools. The federal government, though, has yet to transfer a single penny to Quebec. On this day, let us renew our commitment to defending children's rights and to building a fairer environment and world for them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Red Deer, Lacombe.
Mr. Speaker, let's play a little game of true or false regarding the former Minister of Employment from Edmonton. True or false, the former minister deceived Canadians and his caucus colleagues about his Indigenous heritage.
True.
True. True or false, the former minister from Edmonton's business deceptively advertised itself as Indigenous owned.
True.
True or false, the former minister's ethically challenged business fraudulently applied for and received government contracts meant for actual Indigenous businesses.
True.
True or false, the former minister from Edmonton's firm shares a mailing address with persons named in several cocaine busts.
True.
True or false, despite claims of multiple Randys, there's only one Randy at the former minister's business firm.
True.
True or false, the minister from Edmonton breached ethics rules by contracting his business while sitting at the cabinet table.
True.
True or false, the Prime Minister has one set of rules for actual Indigenous MPs in his cabinet and a different set of rules for non-Indigenous but Indigenous claiming multiple Randy personality disorder MPs in his cabinet.
True.
True or false, the Prime Minister should have fired that guy a long time ago.
Order. Order. The honourable member from Hamilton Mountain.
Thanks to some excellent work by Radio-Canada reporter Christiane Noël, we learned this week that Conservative MPs are being muzzled by their leader. I quote, "The man who promised during his leadership run to make Canada the freest country in the world maintains tight control over the actions of his caucus members." One Conservative told CBC, "Everyone is being watched. What we say, what we do, who we talk to. We're told not to fraternize with MPs from the other parties, and that's not normal." The Conservative leader won't even even let his members advocate for the Housing Accelerator Fund in their ridings. Money for housing for the people who voted them into office. I know my riding of Hamilton Mountain, the Housing Accelerator Fund means $93 million for 9,000 new homes over the next decade. Affordable housing providers like Inwell, Victoria Park Homes, and Good Shepherd say the fund is critical to their work. It's time the Conservatives stop parroting their leaders' slogans and start standing up for their constituents.
Order. Oral questions. Questions orales.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister doubled debt, doubled the cost of housing, doubled crime with firearms, and doubled the use of food banks. And until a few minutes ago, he had a minister with a double identity. Is the Prime Minister aware of the fact that the minister in question directed his company when he was in Cabinet, and he said he was falsely Indigenous? He's aware of this, and he defended and kept this minister in Cabinet. Why did the Prime Minister, why is he so determined to protect the corruption of this minister? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member for Edmonton Centre has left the Cabinet and will focus on defending these allegations. At the same time, Mr. Speaker, when the opposition leader talks about challenges that Canadians are facing, he's not offering any solutions except for cuts. He wants to cut the dental care program. He will cut the pharmacare program for contraceptive drugs. He will cut daycare spots. He will be cutting when Canadians need investment and growth. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, the former Attorney General in the Liberal Party, appointed by this Prime Minister, the first Indigenous person in this role, said that this was an insult for a Liberal minister to say they're Indigenous when it wasn't the case. But let's look at the different treatment of these two people. Why did the Prime Minister let go of a true Indigenous woman for having to tell the truth while supporting a false Indigenous minister who said falsehoods? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, for a leader who says he's concerned about people telling the truth, it's interesting to see that he is muzzling his caucus to not allow them to express their concerns with respect to investments in their community. Today we've learned, Mr. Speaker, that he doesn't allow free expression to his own members. Mr. Speaker, we're here in this place to raise our voices for our communities, but he wants his members to be speaking only his voice in their communities, and that's not how things work. The Conservatives members should say what they think really.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
This Prime Minister in 9 years doubled housing costs, doubled the debt, doubled gun crime, doubled food bank use, and up until a minute ago, he had a minister with a double identity. The Prime Minister knew that the minister was directing his business illegally from inside Cabinet. He knew the minister had claimed there was another Randy when there was no other Randy. He knew that the minister had falsely claimed to be Indigenous in order to take money away from real Indigenous people, and yet he stood by him up until yesterday. Why is it that he always stands up for corruption on his own side?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Edmonton Centre has stepped down from Cabinet to focus on clearing these allegations. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition talks about the importance of speaking up. The reality is his MPs are no longer voices for their communities. They are his voice in their communities. That's not how this place is supposed to work, Mr. Speaker. We are focused on making sure that we're investing in Canadians, supporting them with the kinds of supports for housing, supports for dental, supports for childcare that Canadians need, while all he offers is cuts and austerity.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Muzzling caucus members. This is the guy who fired the first Indigenous Attorney General because she refused to defend his corruption. She said, and I quote, "A Prime Minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed Randy and the other Randy from cabinet long ago. Instead, we have to get to watch white people play ancestry wheel of fortune so shameful and extremely destructive." Why is it that he fired a real Indigenous minister for telling the truth while trying to keep in place a fake Indigenous minister who told falsehoods?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, telling the truth would be MPs continuing to stand up to advocate for their communities. But the Leader of the Opposition has asked them not to be their communities' voices here in Ottawa, but instead be his voice in their communities. This is supposedly the party of freedom and freedom of speech, but he's muzzling his MPs. He's not letting them talk to the media. He's not letting them talk to committees. The reality is he's afraid of what they might say about him, because there is no call to be muzzling MPs this way.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this from a Prime Minister who has 20 caucus members that have signed a letter that they're ready to fire him. Why wouldn't they? This is the guy who's doubled housing costs, doubled gun crime, doubled food bank use, doubled the national debt, kept in place a minister with a double identity. Even his own caucus members know he's not worth the cost, crime, or corruption. So if he's not afraid of anything, why doesn't he call a carbon tax election like Canadian?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition just made very clearly the point that the MPs on this side of the House are free to share their opinions publicly, even when they're ones that I disagree with. Absolutely. But
Colleagues, the more time that we spend here in the chair interrupting the process so that we get order in the House, the fewer questions we will be able to have and fewer answers we'll be able to have in question period. So please control yourselves today. The Right Honourable Prime Minister from the top.
Mr. Speaker, in the minds of Conservatives, we just saw a big gotcha moment where I admitted that Liberal MPs are free to speak their minds and voice their opinions even when we have disagreements. That was astonishing to the members of the Conservative Party because they're not allowed to do that. They are not allowed to speak to the media. They are not allowed to speak their minds. They are not allowed to be voices for their communities. They are not allowed to stand up for investments in their cities on housing. That is the real scandal in this place, Mr. Speaker.
Order!
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, every day this House shows Quebec why we really need to get out of here. In the meantime, we have to repeat that the four parties in this House supported Bill C-282 on supply management, one of the rare consensus we still have here. 2 senators are blocking it. For the Prime Minister, is the Senate worth more than the vote of all elected officials from Quebec? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in this House, like the Bloc leader has underscored, we all have supported unanimously protecting supply management, almost unanimously. On this side of the House, we are in favor of it. But the reality is that the Senate is doing its work. It is looking at this bill, and we will not accept any bills that minimize or take away the obligation of this chamber to protect supply management in any future trade deals. We are clear on this. Regardless of the work of the Senate, the desire of the chamber is clear. The honourable member from Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, democracy has spoken, and yes, there are some 50 Conservative members that voted against supply management. Nevertheless, to try to solve this imbroglio, I will remind everyone else this. I will go to the Senate to meet with senators in person. Can the Prime Minister also meet with these senators himself? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I often meet with senators and I'll continue to do so. But on this particular issue, I want to be absolutely clear. We will always protect supply management, regardless of the opinion of senators. We will defend, that was ironic, but we will defend the integrity of our supply management system, even when we negotiate new trade deals.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
You know, families are telling me that their cell phone bills and their internet bills are so high that they have to cut back on monthly costs, like their swimming lessons for their kids. The Liberals are hurting Canadians by taxing essentials. And King Cut and the Conservatives are going to make things even worse. They want to cut the benefit for children, the child benefits, that can lose families $600 a month. Now, will the Liberals stop taxing essentials like cell phone and internet bills right now?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
If the NDP wants to join us in making life more affordable for Canadians, all they have to do is put an end to the obstruction of the work of Parliament that the Conservatives are leading on. Parliament is supposed to do the work of Canadians in making their lives better, but with the Conservative Party's obstruction, there are bills being slowed down, there are measures around dental care, around Indigenous services, school foods. These are things that we need to unblock in this House, and if the NDP will help us stop the obstructionism by the Conservatives, we can deliver for Canadians.
The honourable member for Burnaby South.
By stopping to tax the essentials.
Every time Bell or Rogers raise the price of your cell phone, the amount of GST people pay goes up too. The GST should never have been applied to essentials, but the Liberals are letting you down. It's time to fix this. Will the Prime Minister give people a hand by eliminating the GST on all essential products? Yes or no? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, if the NDP wants to join us in making life more affordable for Canadians, they just have to help us and the obstruction of this Parliament by the Conservatives. We want to work for Canadians to keep living costs down, but the Conservative Party's obstruction and the NDP's inaction on this issue has made essential bills held up. dental care, school food, housing, Indigenous services are all held up. So many other things. So they need to work with us so we can prevent the Conservatives from blocking aid for Canadians.
Encore une fois, oui.
Once again, all comments must be addressed through the Speaker, but I know that he wasn't really speaking to the Speaker himself. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He's now admitted that the immigration system is broken after 9 years of his government. He blames bad actors. So let's put our detective hat on and find out who those bad actors were. Who was the head of the federal government that increased permits for temporary foreign workers by 154%? Who was the head of the federal government that issued 211% more permits for international students and a population growth plan that boosted growth by 300%? Wow. Can we identify who was that bad actor?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, following a pandemic that had devastated our economy in a short-term way, Canadians needed and businesses needed extra support, so asked for more temporary foreign workers, asked for more international students, and we gave them. Our economy grew. Our economy got back faster than the United States, got back faster than many other countries of the world. And then we're now in a different situation where we've had to step up and reduce immigration numbers to make sure that our housing issues can catch up. This is what a responsible government does. It puts forward solutions that are right in the moment and corrects them when they're no longer needed.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I don't think we found the bad actor yet. Because he blames it on labor market needs, but the biggest growth happened in non-labor market immigration. For example, he boosted permits for international students by 211%, and refugees by 726%. That has nothing to do with filling job vacancies, and when it comes to temporary foreign workers, he allowed more to go to places with already high unemployment. So once again, who was the bad actor that made these terrible decisions?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, these little performances that the Leader of the Opposition
The Right Honourable Prime Minister from the top.
Mr. Speaker, these little performances that the Leader of the Opposition puts on are not fooling anyone. The only thing he is interested in is his own interests, his own quest for power. He is not asking he's asking his MPs to not be strong voices for their communities, including in communities that are relying on the investments in their housing so that they can respond to growing populations and housing pressures caused by increasing population. These are the things we are busy solving, but he would rather muzzle his MPs in order to look good when he's doing his little show.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, he's not helping us find the bad actor. You know, it's like there's been someone else running the country for the last 9 years while the system has come crumbling down. He claims that he cares about housing, but on that subject, maybe we'll ask him this question. Who is the head of the government that was warned by its public service 3 years ago that increasing population growth by 300% would cause the massive housing shortages that we see today?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, with the little performances, when he would rather not admit that when he was Stephen Harper's failed housing minister, he created a total of 6 affordable housing units across the country. He was part of a government that completely pulled back from any investments in housing. And yes, as a government, we've had to step up, make record investments. But even as we are making record investments to accelerate the construction of housing in Conservative ridings across the country, he's preventing his Conservative MPs from standing up for their communities to solve this housing crisis.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when I was housing minister, we had one home built for every 1.5 people added to the population, which meant we were adding houses faster than we needed to, and we were providing affordable homes of half the cost of today. Yeah. Last year, they added one home for every 5 new people, the biggest housing deficit in history. So once again, who was the bad actor running the government that was warned by its officials that all of this out-of-control population increase would cause a housing shortage?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the government in which the Leader of the Opposition was their failed housing minister deliberately chose to get out of the business of housing, which meant we needed to step up with a national housing strategy in 2017 and with record investments, not just to create more housing, but to change the way housing is built in communities across this country. That is money put into the pockets of municipalities to invest, to densify, to rapidify, to accelerate the permitting. Money that he's promising to take away, that his MPs are trying to speak out to defend.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, when I was housing minister, housing was half the cost. When I was jobs minister, I actually cut down the number of temporary foreign workers to make sure Canadians got the job. But the bad actor he's referring to is the same head of government that allowed 211% more study permits for people who weren't supposed to be working. He allowed 154% more temporary foreign workers while Canadians were looking for jobs, and 726% more refugees. Mr. Speaker, if he wants to know who is the bad actor that broke the immigration system, why doesn't he do what he loves to do the most? Look in the mirror.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the irony of this, as the Leader of the Opposition likes to rhyme off facts and figures, is he won't even take a briefing that will allow him to understand the security threats facing this country. For some strange reason that he will not admit to, he has refused to get his security clearance. He has refused to take the briefings necessary to keep Canadians safe. So anytime he chooses to rhyme off facts and figures, we know that he is not actually caring about Canadians, he's caring about himself.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Now we know the difference. We want to axe the tax. He wants to axe the facts.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, after 9 years, we see that immigration is fully broken. He's blaming bad actors for this problem. So can he look at who was at the head of government that allowed population growth increase of 300%, an increase the number of international students by 211%, and an increase of 726% in the number of refugees. If he wants to find the bad actor, do what he likes to do and look in the mirror. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canada had one of the fastest economic recoveries after the pandemic amongst its peers. This is because we were able to welcome people to help support our labour market shortages across the country. But now we're in a different situation. We are solving this issue and adjusting our immigration targets and adjust the number of temporary foreign workers that are coming and adjusting the number of international students that are coming. This is when a government is responsible. This is a part of what it does to ensure proper growth for our country. The Honourable Member for Belley-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, if supply management protection fails, what will Quebecers say? What will they say about the Senate, about the government? What will they say about the leadership of this Prime Minister and of this incoherency? While the U.S. is ready to be more protectionist than ever, Canada, would it give up its agriculture? Would Canada and the Senate, are they the worst negotiators in history? Will they stand up? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we have always been clear as a government. We are going to protect supply management in any free trade agreement, present or future. And because of this, we support the Bloc's bill to protect supply management. If ever this bill fails in the Senate and we can't get it through here in the House because the Conservatives would vote against it, we will be here to protect supply management, even if we need to take government action to complete this task. We are here to protect supply management. And that's simple. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. We want to protect it with legislation, Mr. Speaker. This is ironic. While the Senate of Canada and some senators want to sacrifice Quebec, it's the Bloc that is working for all farmers from Quebec and Canada. Do we realize that it's not just the Bloc? It's not about the Bloc. It's about the quality of what we're eating. It's about fair price. It's about the environmental impact of agricultural practices. I would ask the Prime Minister to come with me this afternoon to meet with these senators. Thank you. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would welcome the Bloc leader to meet with senators. We work regularly with senators to pass good legislation for Canadians. And as I said, we are going to protect supply management. We agree entirely with our Bloc colleagues in terms of the importance of protecting supply management and farmers. And that is why we have taken action. We have committed as a government to never call into question supply management in any negotiation for upcoming free trade deals. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister is just off another bonanza of high-flying, high-carbon, high-taxing hypocrisy. This time on a trip to Brazil, he dripped with condescension for Canadians struggling to pay their bills. He said, it's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive. I've got to be able to pay the rent this month. I've got to be able to buy groceries for my kids to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. This is the Prime Minister burns 100 tons of jet fuel and releases 100 tons of greenhouse gases. When will he stop the high tax hypocrisy?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are facing global challenges right now. As much as the Leader of the Opposition would love to bury his head in the sand, global inflation, climate change that is impacting everyone around the world requires us to be working together, standing up for peace and justice on the world stage, standing up for women's rights, standing up for opportunities for the middle class. This requires us to work together, something the Leader of the Opposition can't do. He can't even work with his own MPs. He has to muzzle them. He is not letting them be voices of their communities in Ottawa. That's the real colors of this Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Order of his caucus wants to fire him, Mr. Speaker, and we know why. Food prices have risen 36% faster in Canada than in the U.S., a gap that opened up as the carbon tax came into force. The Prime Minister just goes on trying to tell Canadians that their mentality is off. He says there's a sense that affordability is in direct contrast with our moral responsibility to protect the planet, trying to shame Canadians for opposing his ineffective, job-killing, inflationary carbon tax. Will you stop lecturing Canadians and call a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I invite Canadians to actually watch my remarks down south, where I was talking exactly about the importance of putting affordability first for Canadians, even as we're fighting against climate change. The Leader of the Opposition can invent things that he thinks I might have said. That's not what I said. What I pointed out was that even as we are fighting climate change, even as we are creating incentives to grow our economy in cleaner, greener ways, we are putting more money back back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians with the Canada carbon rebate, a fact that he's busy gaslighting Canadians against.
I'm going to ask all colleagues, please, not to take the floor. I'm going to ask the honourable member from Grand Prairie Mackenzie to please not take the floor unless recognized by the chair. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has gaslit Canadians so much that Environment Canada has to do a recalculation of the carbon emissions that have come from the lamp. He's the Prime Minister who tells Canadians that the Parliamentary Budget Officer's data, which shows that 100% of middle-class people pay more in carbon tax than they get back in rebates, that they shouldn't believe their eyes. That they shouldn't believe their eyes when they see the grocery prices, which are rising 36% faster in Canada than the U.S. So instead of trying to gaslight Canadians, why not call a carbon tax election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition is once again just not telling the truth. The reality is, the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back from the price on pollution than it actually costs them in paying that price on pollution. The cost of inaction on climate change is astronomical, and that's exactly what he's proposing. Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition should stop misleading Canadians and actually understand that you can't fight for affordability, you can't fight against climate change unless you're investing in Canadians.
I know that certain comments cause a disturbance in the House, but I'll ask all members to be careful about the language that they use. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
His quadrupling carbon tax is all financial pain and no environmental gain. Today we learned that Canada, after 9 years of this Prime Minister, now ranks 62nd out of 67 countries for the Climate Change Performance Index. The Prime Minister says the Canadians starving or lined up at food banks should congratulate themselves for the fact that his tax has made us 62nd. We're 62nd, he pumps his fist into the air, Mr. Speaker.
Shameful.
Why does the Prime Minister make Canadians pay such high taxes to achieve such terrible results?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, the Leader of the Opposition is entirely misrepresenting the facts for his own gain, for his own interest. That's really all he cares about. If he cared about Canadians, he wouldn't be standing against dental care. He wouldn't be standing against more spaces in childcare. He wouldn't be standing against putting more money in Canadians' pockets with a price on pollution that is bending our emissions down faster than our other G7 neighbors, at the same time as it's helping with affordability for 8 out of 10 Canadians in areas in which it lands. The Canada carbon rebate is an affordability measure that is protecting future generations, and he's standing against it.
The Honourable Member from Winnipeg Centre.
Mr. Speaker, child poverty has increased for a second year in a row, and parents are struggling more than ever to buy essentials like baby formula and diapers. The Liberals have let families down. Meanwhile, the Conservatives want to cut childcare and cut the National School Food Program. That'll cost families thousands of more dollars every single year. On World Children's Day, will the Prime Minister lower costs for families by following the NDP's plan to cut GST on essentials?
Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I very much appreciate my NDP colleague bringing up the school foods program and her support for it, but if she really wanted to support it, she would help us stop the obstructionism by the Conservative Party that is preventing us from moving forward on delivering concretely for Canadians the way they need. Canadians need help and investments, and Conservatives didn't have enough in blocking and in voting against school foods, voting against and blocking dental care, voting against and blocking pharmacare. They're now blocking any capacity in this House to deliver for Canadians. Right. The NDP needs to work with us and stop this obstruction.
The Honourable Member from Nunavut.
Uqaqtitiyi, 11 of the 25 communities I represent have experienced boil water advisories this year. That is almost half. Even the UN Special Rapporteur slammed this government for ignoring their obligation to ensure clean drinking water. The Liberals have failed. Nunavut children, families, and whole communities should not have to worry about drinking water. When will this Liberal government finally invest in Nunavut so everyone can have the clean drinking water they deserve?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
To my colleague, I agree. We need to move forward on protecting clean water, on delivering. That's why we're asking the NDP to stop slow-walking the Clean Water Bill, to work with us to get it through this House so we can actually deliver the water that Canadians need from coast to coast to coast, including in Nunavut.
Order. I'm going to ask the from Hamilton Centre to not take the floor unless it's recognized by the chair.
The Honourable Member for Alfred Palan. Mr. Speaker, foreign interference is a real threat to democracies all around the world. Bad actors like China and India and Russia are using tactics, underhanded tactics, to undermine democracies and further their own interests in countries like Canada. And yet, there is a deafening silence coming from the Leader of the Opposition. Can the Prime Minister explain why the Conservative leader must take national security seriously? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank the member for Alfred Palan for his work. Canadians expect all of us here to protect their safety, and yet the opposition leader is not very concerned about national security. He refuses to get a security clearance so that he can protect Canadians from foreign interference. He will reduce funding for CBSA, and he will put guns back into circulation on our streets. Canadians expect a government to protect them and not to jeopardize their safety with dangerous cuts. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Again on the rise, with 3 of the Bank of Canada's 4 measures now above target. And the Finance Minister admitted about a year ago that deficits cause inflation. And so she made this commitment in her budget, and I quote, "The 2023-2024 deficit will be at or below $40.1 billion. Since then, the Parliamentary Budget Officer says that that number has been blown away. Will the Prime Minister tell us here and now how much was last year's deficit? How much?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we just heard it once again from the Conservative leader. The foundation to his entire economic argument is that delivering programs to help Canadians in times of need somehow makes everything worse for everyone. He is proposing cuts to dental care, cuts to child care, cuts to the school food program, cuts to money on responding to the housing crisis in municipalities. His only answer to Canadians hurting is to cut services to them, while he exploits their fears for his own personal gain.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister misheard. It was the Minister of Finance who said that deficits cause inflation. The Prime Minister also said that every dollar of deficits contributes to inflation. And that's why they made the commitment, him and his finance minister, and I'm quoting here, to maintaining the 2023-2024 deficit at or below $40.1 billion, end quote. Last year's books have been closed for 6 years now. He certainly has all the data. Last 6 months. So how much was last year's deficit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Leader of the Opposition is keen to see our fall economic statement, which will talk about measures that are there to help affordability, to support Canadians, to be there, to invest in them. He's looking forward to seeing all these great measures we're putting forward to support Canadians in their time of need, because he can't wait to vote against them, Mr. Speaker. He can't wait to slash services and programs that are helping Canadians. He can't wait to stand in the way of us helping Canadians through this difficult time by putting the best balance sheet in the G7 in service of Canadians who need a little more support. He's voted against supports for Canadians. He's going to continue to.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it is him that admitted that deficit spending adds to inflation. Maybe that's why there's been a record increase in child poverty this year, with 1 in 5 kids now in poverty, 2 million people lined up at food banks. He has admitted, it's not my worldview, he has now admitted that deficits contribute to inflation. So that's why he promised that the deficit would not go above $40.1 billion last year. He's had 6 months since that fiscal year ended. Does he even know what the deficit was in his own government?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, obviously the Leader of the Opposition is keen to hear our fall economic statement, but the reality is he's only looking forward to it because he wants to vote against it, because he's going to vote against measures that support Canadians, measures to be there for Canadian families who are struggling, to invest in things like school foods, to invest in more support for dental care for vulnerable people, to invest in jobs and growth creation right across the country. These are the things he has consistently stood against because he believes in cuts and austerity and trickle down that gives benefits to the wealthiest, but nothing for everybody else.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He's brought nothing but costs for everybody else, Mr. Speaker. He has a food program with no food. He has a pharma program with no pills. He has a gun buyback program that hasn't brought in a single gun, despite spending $67 million. He has a housing program that his minister admits doesn't build houses. But none of those things were the question. It was about his inflationary deficits that he admits drive up the cost of everything. So Canadians are watching and wondering if the guy in charge of this $500 billion enterprise called the Government of Canada knows anything about the numbers. So once again, does he even know the deficit for last year?
Yeah. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr. Speaker, he is eager to hear our fall economic update, and we will share it with him in due course. In the meantime, this House has work to do, Mr. Speaker, on passing legislation that's going to support school food programs, that's going to move forward on delivering dental care for more Canadians who can't afford it, on expanding child care spaces, on putting money in people's pockets at a time where they're needed. And he is crossing his arms and forcing his MPs, because we know he forces his MPs to do whatever he wants, to block the passage of bills in this House, because he doesn't want to see Canadians helped right now. He wants to see Canadians hurt because he's only caring about himself.
L'honorable député de Lac.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, François Legault announced yesterday he's deploying the SQ, the Quebec Provincial Police, to watch Canada's borders. The SQ is going to have to do the federal government's job because no one in Quebec trusts Ottawa is ready to handle a potential wave of migration. It's come to that. It's not as if the SQ was looking for things to do, but they have to, because once again, the feds aren't doing their job. They're just sitting back and waiting for another crisis to materialize, with Donald Trump promising to deport millions of people. Why is this Prime Minister still failing to get out ahead of this one? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as a government, we will always be there to defend the rule of law and to defend the integrity of our borders. We have a plan to increase staffing at our borders with officers and vehicles. We will work with our counterparts all across the country to ensure that Canadians can still have confidence in our sovereignty and the integrity of our immigration system as well as our borders. That's a responsibility that we take very seriously, and we've demonstrated that when we dealt with challenges in the past.
Then I have
the honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Yeah, we saw that last year. Quebecers do not have confidence in this Prime Minister's ability to handle a wave of migration caused by Donald Trump. They saw how he managed the borders during the pandemic. They saw how he managed Roxham Road. They saw him on Twitter inviting the whole world to Quebec and then looking the other way when we were flooded with newcomers, Mr. Speaker. That's why Quebec has no choice but to send the SQ to the borders. Yes, Quebec is sending the SQ to the borders. Does the Prime Minister realize what's going on, Mr. Speaker? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for the professional and excellent work that the SQ is doing to protect all of Quebec, and they will continue to work with federal organizations like the RCMP and CBSA. Mr. Speaker, for a long time now, I've acknowledged the generosity of Quebecers who have done more than their fair share in taking in newcomers to Canada, and that's why we're compensating them. But that's why I'm still waiting for Mr. Legault's approval for temporary more temporary work permits, because we need more immigration. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Quebec is at a breaking point because of decisions by this bad actor here, the Prime Minister of Canada, who sent out a tweet saying, "Welcome to Canada." The last time Trump arrived in the White House, he opened a welcome centre at Roxham Road, which invited tens of thousands of people without housing, without jobs for them, without health care for them. Is he going to do exactly the opposite this time to avoid another crisis for Quebecers? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, protecting our immigration system and our borders has always been top priority for this government. It's our responsibility. The whole world is dealing with tough times, and that is why we took steps. We took the necessary steps to protect our principles and our values, as well as the integrity of our system. And we will keep doing that. We will keep staffing adequately, unlike the Conservatives who cut CBSA officers, who cut the RCMP when they were in office. We will continue to invest to protect the safety of Canadians. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. There was no Roxham Road when the Conservatives were in power, and we had more officers at the border, just less bureaucracy in offices, and the Liberals have done exactly the opposite, and that's why the system's broken after 9 years. They've done the same thing with housing. They've doubled the cost of housing to such an extent that 1/3 of young Canadians are thinking about leaving the country, and his solution is to funnel billions of dollars to bureaucrats who are standing in the way of finding solutions. Why is that his preferred approach? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, once again we see him attacking mayors in the municipalities who are working with the federal government to increase construction, to cut red tape, to get more housing units built. And we know it's working because at least 18 members of the Conservative caucus have applied for that funding for their municipalities to increase the speed of construction and so on. Unfortunately, the Conservative leader is stopping those members from speaking on behalf of their communities and from advancing the interests of their constituents. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
9 years, this Prime Minister has doubled housing costs. In fact, 80% of people in Canada now believe, for the first time ever, that homeownership is just for the very rich. And the cities that have got money from his so-called housing accelerator have had the worst results. Vancouver, housing starts are down 18%. Toronto, down 21%. Ottawa, down 14%. Guelph, down 65%. Why doesn't he follow our common sense plan to cut out the bureaucratic middlemen and gatekeepers and instead use the savings to axe the sales tax and build the homes.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, once again, on housing, his own MPs have been asking us, for example, the $31 million we're sending to Kelowna in the riding of Kelowna Lake Country, a Conservative riding. This is money that is going to make a real difference in their communities, but the Leader of the Opposition is preventing his MPs from standing up and advocating for their communities. This place is supposed to be a place where members are voices of their communities here in Ottawa. Instead, he's sending them to be his voice in their communities. That's not how it works, Mr.
Speaker. Order. The Honourable Member from Brampton Centre.
Canadians elect MPs to be their voice in Ottawa.
Yes.
Despite more than 18 Conservative MPs advocating for their communities to receive money through our government's Housing Accelerator Fund, their leader imposed a gag orders, preventing them from pushing for this essential funding. Can the Prime
Colleagues, order. Colleagues, this member is close to the chair and I can't hear the question. I'm going to ask the Honourable Member to start his question from the top. Let us not waste more time on any more interventions from the chair so we can get through question period expeditiously. The Honourable Member from Brampton Centre from the top, please.
Thank you, Speaker. The reality is Conservative can't stand the truth. Canadians elect MPs to be their voice in Ottawa. Despite more than 18 Conservative MPs advocating for their communities to receive money through our government's Accelerator Fund, their leader imposed a gag order, preventing them from pushing for this essential funding. Can the Prime Minister explain to this House what the Conservative leader's cuts to this program would mean?
Good question.
The Honourable Member from St. Albert, Edmonton, can please keep his counsel until he's recognized by the chair to speak. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Brampton Centre for his question. He, like most of us in this House, understand how important it is to be your community's voice here in Ottawa and not Ottawa's voice in your community. Most of us in this House, apparently not if you're in the Conservative Party of Canada, because the Conservative leader has decided to prevent his own members of Parliament in communities across the country for speaking up for their communities. He is muzzling his MPs, forcing them to be the leader's voice in their communities instead.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
We want to put money directly into the pockets of people buying houses. The Prime Minister has doubled the cost of housing in Canada and tripled the cost of rent in Montreal, Mr. Speaker. After 9 years of spending huge amounts of money on local bureaucracies to prevent construction, about a third of the cost of housing in Canada is taxes. By getting rid of the tax, we can build more housing for less. Will he accept my plan to cut the GST on new builds? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm listening to the Conservative leader criticizing our Housing Accelerator Fund. but he is directly contradicted by at least 18 of his own members who are currently applying to the federal government for funding in their communities to accelerate the construction of housing, to create more densification, to cut red tape. Conservative members know how important it is to invest in housing. The Conservative leader is stopping them from talking and only promoting austerity and cuts. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. At the same time, with C-83, the Prime Minister allowed Paul Bernardo to be transferred from maximum security to a medium security facility. And now we learn that the Liberal government has decided to prevent the families of the victims of Paul Bernardo from testifying in person at his parole hearings, which could lead to releasing this monster onto the streets. Why is this Conservative government preventing victims from speaking out against the release of Paul Bernardo? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the opposition leader knows full well that this is not a government decision. It's a decision made by an arm's-length agency. But that doesn't stop him from trying to use people who've suffered terribly to score a few political points. If he's truly concerned about national security, he wouldn't have been part of a government that cut funding to law and order and allowed more guns on our streets, and he would have chosen to get a security briefing in order to keep Canadians safe.
L'honorable chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Passed HoC Bill C-83, which allowed Paul Bernardo to leave maximum security for more luxury and freedom in a medium security penitentiary. Now we learn that the Liberal government is blocking the family members of Paul Bernardo's victims from testifying in person at his parole hearing, where it will be considered for his release. Under Section 6.1 of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act, the minister could intervene to allow the victims to speak up. Why does he keep protecting Bernardo from the victims rather?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition knows full well these are decisions taken by the Arm's-Length Parole Board, and the Minister is engaged on this issue. But it won't prevent him from instrumentalizing the grief and anguish of families who are victims of crime for his own narrow personal gain. If he actually cared about public safety and national security, Mr. Speaker, he wouldn't have proposed to cut from the police services and border agencies. He wouldn't be proposing to put more guns on our streets, and he certainly would have accepted the national security briefings that would allow him to keep his own party safe.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener South Hespeler.
Mr. Speaker, today is National Child Day, and families in my riding are receiving their Canada Child Benefit checks. This program has supported over 6 million children. But families are worried that the Conservative leader will cut this support. The Conservative leader raves about wanting to cut for housing projects, childcare, pharmacare, and much more. Can the Prime Minister please explain to the House how dangerous these cuts would be?
Great question. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for Kitchener South Hespeler for her advocacy. Today, millions of families across the country are receiving their Canada Child Benefit checks to help with everyday expenses. A reminder that the Conservatives voted against the CCB. At the same time, the Conservative leader now threatens to cut those checks along with vital programs like dental care. He is gaslighting Canadians, claiming his Conservative cuts will somehow make make life better for Canadians receiving those programs right now. It's time for him to admit the truth. His real priority is only cutting services, not supporting families.
The honourable member from Victoria.
Today, people in BC are reeling from a bomb cyclone. Just weeks after another atmospheric river, their homes are damaged, power is out. The climate crisis is here, but the Liberals keep letting Canadians down. Instead of acting, they are handing out billions of dollars to rich oil and gas CEOs, and the Conservatives can't even agree if climate change is real. They will cut the supports that communities need to stay safe. So why are the Liberals tossing handouts to some of the biggest polluters while everyday Canadians bear the brunt of the climate crisis?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we made a commitment as part of the G20 to cut inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and we did that 2 years ahead of all other G20 partners. At the same time, we've put a cap on emissions from the oil and gas sector that is going to continue to protect us, and at the same time, we brought in a price on pollution that puts more money back in the pockets of 8 out of 10 Canadians while cutting emissions and ensuring, inspiring and encouraging innovation. Unfortunately, the NDP hasn't been clear even on something so simple as a price on pollution. On this side of the aisle, we stand up for protecting climate.
The honourable member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister recently admitted his biggest regret was breaking his promise on electoral reform and claimed he didn't know how he could have done things differently. Well, he could have supported a citizens' assembly on electoral reform instead of blocking the most basic initiative to have everyday Canadians, informed by experts, explore better options. Not only did Green, Bloc, and NDP MPs all vote in favour, but 39 MPs from his own party did too. He could still do things differently right now and call a citizens' assembly. Will he do it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can understand my colleague's despair when he sits across from the Conservative Party, who have ceased to be communities' voices here in Ottawa and instead are choosing to be their leaders' voice in their communities. Each of us in this place has the responsibility to advocate for our communities, to speak up, chosen by members of our communities to defend their interests, and Conservatives have forgotten that. They are now the leader of the opposition's voice in their communities, not saying anything that he hasn't stamped and improved, and frightened they're going to see consequences if they dare step out of line. That's not democracy, Mr.
Alors, s'il vous plaît.
Order, please. I would like to draw your attention to the presence in the gallery of Ms. Judith Suminwa Tuluka, the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'd also like to add that she's the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo.
To the presence of the gallery of the Honourable Andrew Furey, Premier for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Colleagues, we have several points of order, so I would ask members who are leaving the chamber to do so quietly so that the chair can hear the points of order.
Sorry? L'honorable.
The honourable member for Drummond is rising on a point of order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that everyone recognizes in this House that statements by members are an important for members to pay tribute to people in their riding and various constituents and organizations, and also to underscore events or situations that are concerning. Mr. Speaker, on several occasions, we've had very sensitive topics raised that we presented during statements by members, and at sometimes it was impossible to focus, to deliver, because the ambient noise was deafening, literally. Mr. Speaker, I would ask you to be careful of this. There's no statement that is more important than another, but everyone should benefit from the same respect and concern of the House. And Mr. Speaker, in all due respect, I would ask you to reassure us that there is silence between statements by members during this, because this week it was particularly difficult. Thank you. I'd like to thank the honourable member for Drummond for this point, and it does raise a very good point. We need everyone's cooperation from all political parties to show respect to each other, to listen, and allow members present their statements in the House. It's the same thing for points of order.
Well, I see that there are other members who are rising on points of order. I'd like to recognize the honourable member from Winnipeg Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising on a point of order to thank the Speaker for his ruling yesterday, as well as to provide some input into how we believe the ruling should be interpreted and enforced based on previous rulings and practice. As the Speaker indicated yesterday in quotes, the Chair seeks the cooperation of all members to be judicious in choosing to wear buttons or pins, and to be equally judicious in choosing to raise their concern with the Chair. We do have some additional guidance on this matter from previous speakers. In particular, I'd like to draw members to the attention of a ruling made on May 15, 2014. States as follows. The general rule, of course, is that pins and paraphernalia are not to be worn if doing so causes disruption in the House. It goes on to say, I am a bit concerned about the point of order being raised now, because these pins have been worn for at least a week or 10 days, as has been my observation to this point in time. Therefore, I'm having some difficulty accepting any suggestion that it is causing disruption, because if it were, points of order would obviously have been raised earlier in the process. I would like to point out, Mr. Speaker, that many of us have been wearing these pins for many, many months now without comment. I'd also like to state, Mr. Speaker, that this point is critical and should inform how we move forward. First, it's disingenuous and beyond belief for members to wake up one day and decide that somehow that this has been accepted and in use for months is now somehow causing disruption. If something is disruptive, it is disruptive. Second, while I do appreciate that disorder and disruption have always and will continue to be the standard by which pins and indeed broader behavior are judged, we do need to be guided by the Deputy Speaker's intervention in 2014, when he said explicitly, I am having some difficulty accepting any suggestion that is causing disruption. Disruption in and of itself should not mean that a pin is out of order. It is vital that we don't normalize in this chamber a scenario where the loudest and most disruptive voices can use their own disruption to try and force the Chair's hand. And thirdly, we should be guided by the fundamental principle of freedom of speech, and the protection of which is one of the prime responsibilities of the Speaker. As the House of Commons procedure and practice states on page 317, in quotes, it is the responsibility of the Speaker to act as the guardian of the rights and privileges of members and of the House as an institution. Freedom of speech may be the most important of the privileges accorded to members of Parliament. Yesterday, during my intervention, Mr. Speaker, in trying to communicate how I've expressed my freedom of speech, wearing red dress buttons to signify the ongoing genocide of Indigenous women, or shirt buttons to signify the genocide that occurred in residential schools, and now the watermelon button to signify the genocide that's been recognized by the United Nations, I was stopped before I was able to speak. Members must be able to continue to express solidarity with constituents and individuals across Canada. This right must never be infringed upon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the honourable member from Winnipeg Centre for that substantive addition to the ruling yesterday, and I will, of course, consider carefully what the member had raised. I have two more points of order. I have the honourable member from Kingston and the Islands who rose on his feet earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order that actually comes out of question period from yesterday. I think that it is well established and agreed by everybody in this chamber that the reputation of the Speaker is an impartial reputation, and when I say the Speaker, I mean the chair occupant. That might be yourself, it might be the deputy, it might be one of the assistant speakers from time to time. It might even actually be somebody who just sits in there for a few moments to substitute for when a speaker has to depart. The point is that the impartiality of that position is absolutely critical. And in fact, a former speaker of that used to sit in that chair, the member who currently is the House Leader for the Conservatives, the member from Regina Capel, once said in a ruling on September 24th of 2014, he said, "Another of our time-honored traditions is that the respect of the office of the Speaker." O'Brien and Bosk at page 313 states that, quote, "Reflections on the character or actions of the Speaker, an allegation of bias, for example, could be taken by the House as breaches of privilege and punished